Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michelle DeGrasse, and I am the Senior Manager of Community Advancement at the Association of Chamber of Commerce Executives, and I'd love to welcome you all to our webinar today titled Strategic Planning and Funding for Talent Development. We've got a great lineup of speakers today to talk to you about how to fund your community development work related to workforce development. First, I wanted to touch base on a few logistics. One, currently all attendees are in listen-only mode, so you all are on mute. If you do have a question for any of the panelists, please make sure to put your questions on the questions box on the side panel, and we'll get to all the questions at the end of the broadcast. You'll also notice that on the side panel, you have the opportunity to download all of the materials from today's webinar, and you could do so now if you chose to. One other thing to note is that this webinar is being recorded and will be available in the next few days on ACCE's website, and I will make sure to send everyone an email with the information when everything is uploaded to ACCE's website. So thank you again for the panelists on today's webinar. We have our presenters are Jason Hutchinson, who's President and CEO of the Greater Burlington Partnership in Iowa, and he's been in this role for about 10 years now, starting in 2007, and he's really grown the Burlington Partnership's footprint, especially in community development. We also have Susan Davenport, who is President and CEO of the Gainesville Area Chamber of Commerce, who she's been in this role now for a couple of years. Before that, she served as the Chamber's Vice President of Economic Development, and even before that, she served many years at the Austin Chamber of Commerce. And last but not least, we do have Lawrence McKinney, who's from Convergent Nonprofit Solutions and serves as their Senior Project Director. And over his 29-year career as a professional, he's been able to raise over $90 million for economic development initiatives. And during his tenure, he's led many economic development corporations and chambers, including the Daytona Regional Chamber of Commerce. So thank you again to our panelists for being on the line, and we look forward to learning a great deal today from you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lawrence to kick us off.
Thank you, Michelle. I appreciate that. And on behalf of our panelists, Jason and Susan, as well as our sponsor, Convergent Nonprofit, let me also add a warm welcome to those of you on the line today, wherever you may be. Our goal here today is pretty straightforward. We want to provide you with meaningful information, some pertinent examples and key takeaways that will motivate you to expand, begin, lead, facilitate a workforce development strategy for your community. A little more background on me. In 1986, I began what would become nearly a 30-year career in economic and community development. Started in Augusta, Georgia as a project director for their Chamber of Commerce, and I worked for a wonderful mentor who told me that in order to move up in our profession, I should move around. And so I spent 7 years there. He said, go to communities that need help where things aren't going so well, and then anything and everything you do will be an advancement for your community and an advancement for you. And so after 7 years, I left Augusta, took his advice, led several other communities in Georgia, and then left. The last chamber was in Florida in Daytona Beach. During that time, I've been a County Development Authority Director, a Chamber of Commerce President, as well as President of several public-private partnerships. And I've learned a lot of lessons over those years, some harder than others, but they're all very worthwhile. I've seen our communities grow, the roles of our educational system evolve, and the factors, frankly, very important to business have changed somewhat dramatically. I love being in the trenches in local communities, like I'm sure many of you do, but what I enjoy most now is helping communities raise money and generate community support at the same time for what they're trying to achieve unique to their community. 3 years ago, I came on board with Convergent, and I honestly have to say it's been one of the most rewarding experiences in my career, helping to raise money for communities like all of you on the line to help them reach their unique goals. I've been in Kentucky, Virginia, Illinois, and right now I'm in Rapid City, South Dakota, and I'm pleased to say it's not freezing. It's actually going to get up to around 50, which is feels like 80 in Florida to me. So enough about me. What led to this? Let me give you a little bit of background. There's kind of three things came together. The first was in 2016, Area Development Magazine published their annual ranking of the issues important to business. And they started publishing those the same year I started in this business, so I've been following that forever it seems like. But in 2016, for the first time, workforce development, the availability of labor became the top priority over transportation and highway accessibility. So it took 30 years to happen, but it's finally arrived. The second aha moment for me, I think, was when ACC published their poll last year about capital campaigns, specifically who's doing them, and if you don't do them, then why aren't you? And frankly, I was amazed and still am at the percentage of communities that don't do them, yet they don't have a workforce development strategy either. And then finally, those two things kind of came together, but my personal experiences as a witness to the changing needs of our workforce and sometimes slow or even non-existent reaction that our peers have had on the issue drove me to, put pen to paper and write an article for ACC entitled Talent, Currency of the 21st Century, Economic Developer. And I hope many of you have read it, and if not, I'm sure we'll have a copy for you as well. If you could go to the next slide, Michelle. So if you had a chance to read that, let me just give you three kind of broad bullet points that should have come out of that article, and then we're going to move on to our panelists. But the first takeaway should be if they write it, they will underwrite it. I'm sure a lot of you have heard that over the years, but in our business, to be successful, you really need to have engaged community leaders. Heavy lifting is best accomplished with many hands. The second takeaway should be the recognition that talent is the currency of the 21st century developer. If you want to move the needle on expansions and relocations, available talent and a skilled workforce is the single biggest investment to do so. In the article, I mentioned Caterpillar because they moved to Chicago along with 60 other companies, and they stated they did it because that's where the talent is now. And so I think what you have to keep considering is companies in your community at some point may no longer wait on you so that you have this great workforce talent pipeline. You got to get ahead of that decision. And then as for the phrase and title of the article, I have to give credit to Beth Dottie, the executive director of the Roanoke Regional Partnership. We did her campaign in 2016 and 17, and she said it all the time, that talent is the currency of the 21st century economic development. The final takeaway should be that there's no single magic bullet. In the article, I illustrate multiple communities with different talent attraction or workforce development initiatives. All of them are unique to those communities. I think there's many solutions, as there are grains of sand at the beach in Daytona. I think it's only limited by your community's imagination. So with that as a relatively quick backdrop, again, let me welcome you, and we appreciate your time here. We have a wide range of communities on the line, from coast to coast, small to large, rural to urban, and we're going to do our best to capture the essential elements that would apply to all of you. Our two panelists come from two very different communities, again illustrating there is no single magic bullet to cure our collective labor issues. One is Burlington, Iowa, with a population of 28,000 and a state of 3 million residents. The other is Gainesville, Florida, has a population of 132,000 and a state of 21 million residents. They bring a different set of values, resources, and solutions, but they're both tackling the same issue, specifically workforce development, like all of us are. And they know and we know worldwide competition for economic growth is fierce. In the U.S. alone, there's 15,000 entities competing for a finite number of relocations and expansions. So with that as a little bit of a background on me and how we got here, let me now turn it over to Jason Hutchinson. He's the CEO of the Greater Burlington Partnership. Jason?
Well, thank you, Lawrence. The Burlington, Iowa area is in southeast Iowa, and the partnership model that we have here really is a collection of 6 different nonprofits, all in that community and economic development space. And it works really well being under one leadership model with the partnership. And it also works well from a fundraising perspective, because every funder you visit with may have a different pet project or a different area of interest. And through our model, we're able to cast a wide net from an investor point of view. And a number of years ago, we set out on a capital campaign, and we have typically funded economic development in our community over time with an economic development campaign. And on the next slide, you'll see that our current campaign period is 2014 to 2018, wrapping up at the end of this year. And although it used to be a pure economic development capital campaign, we've diversified that over the years to include tourism and Main Street redevelopment and some of those other areas of focus for our organization. And when we're drafting the plan and when we're testing the plan and gathering investor feedback, I've noticed sometimes that there can be some tension. On the one hand, we want to assemble an effective strategy that's going to be trackable, that's going to have good results and really do good work on the part of our community. On the other hand, I also want to raise money. So we got to keep the lights on and we got to have the dollars to implement the programs that we care about. And sometimes there can be a gap between an effective strategy and one that will also raise money. And sometimes that area of workforce development can have a lot of friction between the two. Certainly, in our last campaign, there were things that I wanted to do that the investors weren't so fond of, and there were things that they wanted us to do that I wasn't very excited about. And so sometimes that tension can exist. But when we went out and field tested our capital plan and our 5-year plan for the future, our existing employers, our primary sector companies, those in the industrial base, they said, we love you, we love the plan that you put together, but if there is no workforce development, if there is no talent component in this, there is going to be no money for you. They were very clear about that. And we were asking our primary sector companies anywhere from 25,000 to 125,000. And they were very clear, we cannot get money from corporate for this plan unless you've got a talent piece associated with that. So on the next slide, there's kind of a pie chart that shows how we divided up the proceeds from our capital campaign, and 13% of that money raised in the bottom left-hand corner was really set aside for workforce attraction and preparedness. It was really the category that we put that in. Our campaign goal was $1.75 million, and fortunately the community responded very favorably to our plan, and we were able to hit the $2.1 million mark in that campaign. So the strategy that at least put together was bankable and investable. So on the next slide, this just gives you a kind of a snapshot from our campaign booklet. This is the raw text from our plan that we took to investors, particularly on that workforce attraction piece. And there are too many strategies to go into right now and walk through each one of those. And so what I'm going to do is dive into the youth programming strategies just a little bit. And so really, as we looked at our youth programming, we started from a strategic side. And one of the things we wanted to ensure that we would do would be to expose young people to the actual careers in our area. It might be great that someone wants to be an astronomer or a rocket scientist, but in our rural community of 28,000, we don't have any of those occupations. And so we wanted to make sure that we inspired young people for the jobs that we do have in our community. And we wanted to hit at various age levels. So there's always this perennial debate over when must you expose kids to the careers of the future. And rather than having lots of meetings about arguing when that appropriate time would be, we said, let's just hit them at all ages. And so we wanted to put together a plan that would touch kids at multiple levels throughout their developmental years. And that really then aided in having multiple points of contact. So not just interacting once or twice, but really having repeated exposure to the occupations available in our community. And then we moved into, all right, taking the strategy and putting that aside, then what are the actual activities that we might take a look at? And there's no magic formula here. There's nothing earth-shattering. Many communities do these, but we centered in on career fairs at both 5th grade and 8th grade. Again, give a couple of years in between and the same career tracks. So exposing maybe not to exactly the same sessions, but those same career tracks in 5th grade and then also in 8th grade so we can have that repeated exposure. Then another program was interacting with high school juniors really early in the second semester and having them voluntarily sign up so they're not compelled to participate in this, but be dismissed from school for a day to spend about half to 3/4 of a day in a manufacturing facility. And some of it was job shadowing, but really it was designed to expose to the variety and depth of careers within a manufacturing facility, everything from engineering and production to quality, logistics, supervisory, all of those sorts of things really during that intensive 5 to 6 hour session hitting those various components of a manufacturing facility. The third bullet here, probably one of our most successful things has been a STEM festival in that science, technology, engineering, and math field, designed as a session on Saturday from 10 to 2 with lots of employers having interactive booths. So the requirement is you can't put up a poster that says what you do. You must have an activity where people can touch and experience what it is at your place of business. And because it's on a Saturday, it's really outside the realm of education. And so you really come with a parent or with someone else from your family member there. And so it's a way to engage the entire family. And for our community, we've had between 800 and 1,000 participate every year in that STEM festival. So it's been a very successful event for us. And then that last bullet just has some other items. Again, nothing earth-shattering, but things in that youth programming strategy that we deployed. Of course, anytime you go through a program, there are some lessons learned. There are some takeaways that perhaps you can apply, and we've certainly taken note of. And one of those is that other groups are not accountable to us. We believe, and our investors believe, that somehow that when the chamber president speaks, everyone assembles in a room and they take their marching orders, and then when they leave a meeting, they go and do whatever it is that the chamber president tells them to do. And that sounds good on paper, but that's not actually how it works. Educational bodies, state government, workforce offices, these other agencies, there's a lot of money poured into the workforce field, but very little of that money is directly controlled by the business community or even by the Chamber of Commerce. And I wish it was, but it's not. And so those folks are not accountable to us, and they might have grants that have metrics or even programs of work that don't align with what we even think the community needs. And so that was we knew that going into it, but it really became evident over a period of time that other groups are not accountable to us. Secondly, participation, being at the table, doesn't necessarily mean that other groups have true buy-in to the programming that we attempt to deploy. An example is with our manufacturing days with the high school juniors. You sign up and you miss a day of school, and even though we would take attendance and send reports back to the schools, one school in particular had a pretty high no-show rate. And in fact, every time we did the day, their no-show rate got larger, and we couldn't figure out what was going on. And it turns out that the school did not set up any accountability structure. And so after a while, the kids learned that they could sign up for this day, skip it, and have it not even count as an absence because no one at the school was paying attention. And so just because the school said, yeah, we'll participate, does not mean that they had the buy-in that we would have liked into making sure that that was a successful day. One of the things that our investors and even plant managers said we want is a job aggregation board. And this isn't new, and we were somewhat skeptical of how successful this might be. And I don't love the site that was produced. It's not very user-friendly. I don't think it's a very good marketing tool. But one of the great things that came about from it is it is a job aggregator for our labor shed area. And it's adjusted in real time. And for our area, in fact, I looked this morning on this site, we've got 1,018 available open advertised jobs in our market. And although the site isn't very user-friendly, the aggregate, just having that number, has allowed us to shape the workforce conversation in our community. It's a pretty powerful statement when we say 1,000 open available jobs today. The last thing, which is unfortunate, is that we will never be able to cross workforce off of our list. Our next 5-year plan, we're going to be launching our next capital campaign here in another month, and I'm afraid to say we're going to have a lot of the same strategies and challenges in our next 5-year plan, because even though we think we've made progress, we're not done. And so it's good for raising money because we can still use the same sales pitch, but it's not so good from a mental exhaustion standpoint because the work will never be done. Lawrence, I'll kick it back to you.
Thank you, Jason. That was great. Great points, great lessons, and an excellent overview of your workforce development, specifically the youth side of that. I know many communities that will be able to use some of the points you just made. Let me take just a minute to address some other key points I think that can apply to all of you that are listening. First is to fund Burlington's program. Convergent conducted the last two capital campaigns there. In 2009, we raised $1.5 million, and as you just heard Jason say, in 2014 it was $2.1. Prior to that, Burlington volunteers raised money, and it was anywhere from $315,000 to $628,000. Increasing the goal, when you do these campaigns, I hope, I'm sure that Jason's goal going forward on the new campaign will be higher than 2.1, but it's not always possible, and it's definitely not possible if you haven't engaged your leadership in discussions strategically, if you haven't achieved some of these goals you set and communicated those, and held yourself accountable. Great to hear how the school system wasn't held accountable, so there was a loophole in there. So I think the first lesson from Jason's example is to be successful in your communities as he is. You're going to have a plan with achievable goals, metrics that mean something, that matter, a robust communication strategy, and a governance structure that is accountable to the investors. That's really key in every campaign and every plan. The second lesson learned is that investors will invest significantly when the pain of doing nothing becomes greater than the pain of doing something. During the last capital campaign there, one of Burlington's investors' businesses was finding it so difficult to hire carpenters. They told us they could hire a dozen today. They weren't bidding on multiple projects that they likely could have won. And so this was lost revenue to their business. It was lost revenue to the Burlington economy, lost taxes to the local government, and a job supporting an individual or a family. So for the second campaign, that same company increased their investment from $50,000 to $125,000. I think the pain had finally risen to a level for them that they were willing to invest significantly more to ensure success. And they're not the only company in Burlington. There are other companies there too that want to see that success, and that's why their campaigns have gone up each year. And that's true of that Caterpillar example I used earlier too. The pain of them staying where they were had finally reached the point where doing nothing was no longer feasible. So they made a painful decision to move out of the town that had been theirs for so long. The third lesson learned, in addition to all those that Jason mentioned, is that you'll raise more money using an outside professional than you will internally, doing it yourself. And I know that appears self-serving, but speaking from my 25 years in the Chamber Development Authority private partnership business, where I had to raise millions for the public-private partnerships I ran, I can tell you unequivocally that your investors will tell you what you want to hear when they perceive you as their community peer, as a local resident, a community peer, and they'll tell you something. They'll tell you what you need to hear when you're seen as an outside expert. And the difference is often significant. It allows a plan to be more finely tuned, the business plan, which will result in higher financial investments because they have emotional appeal to them. With that, let's move on to our second example in Gainesville, Florida. As mentioned earlier, we have Susan Davenport. She's the CEO of the Gainesville Chamber of Commerce. Susan, the floor is all yours.
Great. Thank you so much. I'll just start off. I want to kind of give you a verbal overview of Gainesville. We are a two-county MSA. This is a Gainesville MSA, north central Florida. Population of our region is about 280,000. The majority of that being in one county, Alachua County, and you can see that the Alachua County Education Compact is what I'm going to reference here. And the county has about 260,000 residents. We are, and Gainesville being the largest city within that county with about 130,000. We are the home of the University of Florida, which is the number 9th public ranked university in the nation. They have about 53,000 students, and they do about $800 million a year in research. And then also Santa Fe Community College, which has another about 25,000 students, and they were ranked in 2015 the number 1 community college in the nation by the Aspen Institute. So from all accounts, we are kind of an educational educational city. This is probably the most highly educated community in Florida, percentage-wise in degrees, et cetera. And so we take this education topic very seriously. Here at the Chamber, we are a joint chamber and economic development entity. We have about 1,300 members that employ about 80,000 people. And as Convergent well knows, as they did our fundraising strategy for the Transforming Greater Gainesville strategy, back in 2014 and 2015, education was really a cornerstone of this particular strategy. And just for a little background on that, our chamber structured around 4 lines of business that was sort of redeveloped and organized in 2013. Education being one of the cornerstones, and as our strategy was developed and penned, and then fundraising began, that was, as always, a prominent piece of what people were interested in. Our businesses were very passionate about, and so it I think was a big key, as well as Convergent's activity, to take us to a very successful outcome with that. And they'll be happy to know that I'm still finding new investors. And last year alone, I think we brought on 19 new companies using the strategy and using all of the materials that were developed for that. But I'm going to fast forward now or kind of look back, I guess, quickly to say that when we put together the Alachua County Education Compact, we signed this particular compact in May of 2015. So as we moved forward with the strategy, this was one of the elements that were key, as I mentioned. And just a quick shout out to David Rattray, if he's on the phone by any chance, Vice President of Education for the Los Angeles Chamber. He really guided us and tutored us in how to put this together. And our Vice President of Education and Talent, Ian Fletcher, was really the driving force behind this. But so let me explain kind of what we've done and where we are. The Education Compact is, as you see on this slide, a collaborative of Alachua County's education, business, workforce development, government institutions, philanthropic, community-based orgs, parents, families, all working collaboratively to improve systemic outcomes in education. It was really a way to bring all of these entities and groups and streamline the efforts that we had for maximum opportunity and benefit. Really, if you can see the purpose there, it's to mobilize the community around education, K through 12, and better prepare students for higher ed and sustainable careers. Our goal, obviously, being to create that seamless talent pipeline that feeds right into our higher education institutions here in the region. So if you take a look at the next slide, this collective impact, it's a collective impact model that represents the signer's commitment. I think I mentioned, but we have 26 signers that originally signed in May of 2015, and 2 more entities have come on since then and asked to retroactively sign on to be part of this group. So there's 28 total. They basically commit with their signature to a common agenda around addressing this single specific issue, and that's aligning our education opportunities with the needs of our local industries here in the region to create pathways to success for our students. As part of, for those of you who have potentially dealt with collective impact models, you may know that some of the attributes of those really are bringing all participants having this common agenda. But one of the big elements of a collective impact model is that you have to have a strong backbone organization that leads and manages kind of the entire collaboration. Well, that's the role that our chamber undertook. We served as that backbone, and Ian has been our lead on the ground. When this compact was signed, he spent 3 years facilitating this process and bringing all of these organizations together under common activities and goals. And let me look at the next slide here if you'll see what we've got, the ASEC 6 goals. So after this was signed in May of 2015, we undertook a lot of work on data analysis. We actually put together a data and metrics team from our universities to pull together tons and tons of information about outcomes and what our students were currently, where their achievement levels were, where we saw gaps, what really fed into their success. We looked at everything. And out of that, there were 6 overarching goals, and I want you to see those on the slide here. All students graduate from high school. Oh, I'm sorry, if you'll go back one slide. All students are prepared for college and career success. They all have access to pathways. They develop healthy lifestyle habits. They develop an appreciation for the arts, very important to us as we have a lot of activity and focus around STEM education, as I know almost all communities do, but the arts are a really key part of that for us here in Greater Gainesville, and all students develop a sense of social responsibility. These were 6 overarching goals. We then looked and moved that into 5 areas of focus, and you'll see these here: early childhood education, parent academies, K through 12, higher education, and workforce development, and how all of these particular areas leveraged, focused, and streamlined into one specific outcome first, or into the multiple specific outcomes for our student. Here are the outcomes on this next slide that we considered of paramount importance: increasing school readiness rates, increased high school graduation rates, increasing access to post-secondary credentials, creating an aligned and productive workforce. And so those are the outcomes, and there are multiple different measures and metrics that go behind those, and I'll end with those. But I want to tell you about what happened after all of that analysis took place. From then, we moved into a strategy leadership group, and that leadership took all of that information and focus and goals, and they basically came up with what they felt were 6 strategies that we should undertake, and everything that the 28 organizations do. As you undertake an activity, it should be noted under one of those 6 strategies. And then we can collect data, we can look at the programs that were undertaken, measure the results, and come out with an understanding of where we're excelling, where we're meeting standards, and maybe where we're falling short for any type of retroactive or facilitation that needs to take place to make that successful. So here's strategy 1, collaboration, and it's really just support and enhance the collaborative partnerships through all of these different areas of our community and region. We want arts, business, civic, cultural, education, all of these communities to support the development of the whole child. In the second strategy, quality, support and enhance high quality teaching and learning in classrooms and other learning environments. The third strategy is the next slide. Innovation, support and enhance innovative practices and programs that are working to enhance learning, the inclusion of the arts, healthy lifestyles, and social responsibility. The fourth strategy was advocacy, coordinating advocacy on pre-K through 20 funding and educational policy issues at every level of government. I've got an example of that I'd like to share with you because we spent so much time on it this year. But it's called our I3 initiative, Putting Kids First, and it was basically an infrastructure investment initiative that surrounded the next generation and what we felt were paramount needs for their growth and development. 1 being public school infrastructure, 2 being roads and transportation, and 3 being our parks. And I can tell you after 9 months of study, they prioritized our highest need was the physical facilities for our school buildings, and so that became a key tenet of what we will be advocating for on some funding for that in 2018. Strategy 5, if you look at that, access, providing students multiple pathways for workforce and career prep. And then strategy 6 was inclusiveness, ensuring opportunities and support services for students and families. And again, everything that we look to do basically should fall as the signers of this collective impact model. The signers and organizations should take a look at all of the initiatives and activities they're doing and be sure that we're falling under one of those categories. Success measures, if you look up here, we're looking at all types of measurement. Some of the more prominent ones, graduation rates is the very first one up there. That's, of course, of huge importance to all of us. I can tell you we got great news about 2 weeks ago that the graduation rates had increased 5% year over year as new data had emerged. So we think we're at least on the right track. We're looking at promotion rates, credit accumulation, attendance, behavioral referrals. If you look at the CTE, career and technical education participation rates, looking at certifications for that. Basically, internships, jobs. If you look at the next slide, you can see there's even more passing rates, students at grade level 3. We have data that we acquired around where we were at all of those, and each of those are being measured as we move forward to understand where we're having the best impacts. It's really been a great effort, and I think it's almost really in these 3 years, 2.5 years, we're really just reaching strides on how this is working. I can tell you I was at a school, Eastside High School, last week, and they were basically, companies had come forward to donate laptops to be kept in the media lab so that students who did not have computers at home could come in there, check out these laptops, go to a station and do their homework for things that required a computer and internet access. So we have stories like that around all of these, and each of those fit under a particular strategy of 1.6. This is kind of a big picture overview on that, and I want to be cognizant of the time, but I can tell you that we're very excited with the direction that this is going to. I think we're seeing more and more people interested in understanding what we're doing. There are multiple different aspects of this that I couldn't even get into. It's quite an endeavor. There's an asset map going on now collectively throughout the region, such that we know we're connecting the assets to all of the different strategies elements. And if anyone needs any background or deeper dive in this, I would be happy to answer any questions, but Ian Fletcher, our Vice President of Education and Talent, is really a guru on this, and so at any point, feel free to call either one of us, and happy to update you on these.
Thank you, Susan. That was wonderful. I love the presentation. It's you're excited, and I think that keeps other people excited too, and motivated. So we have yet another example of a workforce development initiative. It's got different strategies and metrics, but community leaders hoping for the same similar outcomes that Jason is. Susan said it's based on a collective impact model that's used in many communities around the country. In fact, we're using one up in Rapid City as well. Like Burlington, we had, as Susan mentioned, we had the opportunity to lead their campaign. We were able to raise just over $6 million. And so they've got different resources available and different approaches, but there's equally valuable lessons. So I think another first lesson is you don't have to be a school or training facility to lead the effort and change the culture. I can't tell you how many times I've been asked, well, what can a chamber do or an EDO do? Because they don't train the workforce. And so how do they advance the needle? But both Jason and Susan gave perfect examples. They show you can bring a diverse community together, and you can change the cultural mindset by facilitating discussions, debates, and strategies. By funding scholarships, professional education, career fairs, company tours, you can begin shaping the mindset of the trainers. You are literally training the trainers with their full knowledge and consent. Second lesson is that investors prefer outcomes to output. It's fine to say you want to achieve a 15% increase in high school graduation rates or a 12% increase in students reading at grade level by age 8. That's fine. That's the output of your efforts. But what's the outcome of those outputs? At Convergent Outcomes Labs, it's run by Tom Rawlser, we determined just that. The outcome of Gainesville increasing their graduation rates and improving the workforce lends much greater credibility and likelihood that they're going to be able to attract 3,500 new primary jobs that are in their goals as well, which will generate $228 million in new payroll or $126 million in new consumer expenditures or $10 million in more car sales. You know, that's quantified in dollars and cents unique to every community, and it's based on regional wages and regional buying habits. Your investors crave this kind of data. It resonates with them. It's not a charitable contribution. It's a return on investment they fund in their marketing or their business development budgets. The third lesson is that in every county and every city, there are volunteer leaders that we always count on to tackle big, hairy, audacious goals, regardless of the roadblocks, regardless of the pessimists that say it can't be done, regardless of their own hectic schedules. Susan's work has many hundreds of volunteers because they believe their time is worth the investment. It's bold. You got to seek these people out early in the process because small thinking yields small results, and men and women will follow leaders with lofty aspirations, as it's captured in this quote by Von Gogh. With that, let's go to the next slide. And I'm going to wrap up our comments from Convergent with kind of some top 10 strategies for an effective campaign and program development. So as a community leader, I'd encourage you to make a personal commitment to just get started, begin, initiate. You know, I'm going to quote Von Goethe again, it's not enough to know, we must apply. Willing is not enough, we must do. Don't wait for the perfect moment or situation. It never really ever exists. Every day you sit on the sidelines is another day your competition moves ahead. Number two, personally assemble relevant data for analysis and discussion. We heard that in both these examples. They have the data. We like to make decisions that are data-driven. The easiest way is to do it yourself, especially if you're, really starting from scratch. Interview 20 or 30 key businesses in town, get a flavor for the workforce issue. It costs nothing but your time, and where better to spend your time than with your customers. Third one, establish credibility with key stakeholders. So, once you've done a little bit of ground research yourself, present your findings to a small group, possibly just your executive committee, if you're in that kind of structure. It may be a different committee. It may be the 5 or 6 leaders in your community that are kind of unstated behind the scenes. Because what you're doing is you're showing initiative, and at the same time, you're nurturing possible future investment if this continues to build steam. And remember that old axiom that if they write it, they will underwrite it. So you've got to get them involved early. Fourth one, build diverse and inclusive organizational and community support. This can be as broad as the entire community. One time it was for me when I was in Atlanta running an organization called Partners for Tomorrow. And in that instance, we brought the entire community to the table. We have 300 or 400 people at a meeting over the course of 6 months. On the flip side of that, it could be as little as or as small as your board of directors. You've gone from your executive committee, the small group, to a larger group, your board of directors, or a similar group. Because again, what you're doing is you're planting the seeds for investment and support. The fifth strategy is to use data to set goals, metrics, and implementation. Like both Jason's and Susan's examples, investors make decisions based on data. And that's fundamental success. If you lose sight of the goals and how they are measured, you won't get a second bite at the apple. That's just the way business is. All right, the sixth one, hire an outside fundraising consultant to determine feasibility. I mentioned that earlier, and it absolutely is critical, even if you don't use that consultant to raise money down the road or solicit future investors. It gives you the optimal chance of building the best business plan you can. 7, adjust plans, strategies, and alliances as necessary. I've never seen a plan that didn't change except for the dozens and dozens and hundreds and thousands that are sitting on shelves all across our country. Plans have to be dynamic, which is why we always recommend the best practice of forming a strategic leadership council of the top 15 to 20 investors. That council should be quarterly, and 25% of that time they spent, whether it's an hour or hour and a half, should be spent looking at the metrics and the data. The other 75% should be spent on meaningful, insightful discussion, on strategy, on moving the needle forward. That's what leaders like to talk about. 8, you need to raise the money to raise the bar. Again, I don't know very many, if any, organizations that are sitting around with a pile of cash for bold ideas. I know I never had that availability. For the issues that matter to them, businesses will invest above and beyond anything they're currently doing. From a Convergent perspective, we have multiple options to help any size community. We have some quarter-time project directors, which is a week a month. We've got half-time, 2 weeks a month. We have full-time that, some of them actually live in the community during the campaign, and some will fly in on Mondays and Fridays, but they'll spend the whole month there. Our campaigns typically go from, 8 months to 16 months, but the vast majority are about 10 months. Number 9, implement the plan and hold leadership accountable quarterly. Again, you got to get started, and you got to start tracking some metrics and use that leadership council I mentioned earlier for ideas, not staff reports. And then the 10th one, and I can't stress this enough, everything needs to be communicated. When leadership is left out of the loop for too long a period, they become unmotivated. And if you don't have the budget for an investor relations person or professional communications firm, you need to embed it in an overall campaign budget. I've seen too many, well-intentioned plans lose steam in current funding, and more importantly, they lose the possibility of trying again in the future because key leaders became disenfranchised with the entire effort. It may be a generation, or maybe 10 years, maybe 8 or 10 years before they're willing to give it a try again. With that said, my last thought is just to remember that people came before us in our positions, and people are going to come after us. And this is our time as economic developers, as community leaders, to carry the future for the next generation. With that, I'll turn it over to Michelle, and we'll see if we've got some questions here.
Thank you so much to our panelists. We do have a couple questions in the queue. And if you do have a question, there's a questions box. You can just type it in, and we'll try to get to all of them. The first one is specifically for Jason about your job aggregator tool. The person wants to know what is the platform you used, and how did you pull the numbers on the platform?
It is a great question, and fortunately, in the state of Iowa, the state workforce offices have a team of people that spend an awful lot of time aggregating the job board. So right now, it is done manually, and that is a really big effort. And so, but it's done really all across the state. And we had looked at some platforms in terms of potentially scraping jobs, but one of the issues that we ran into were many corporations now are really only listing their jobs on their platforms and mainly their corporate websites. And to try to have a model to scrape all of those on a regular basis was difficult for us to find. And so we tapped into the state's job board. Even though the state's job board is not user-friendly, it is good at the manual aggregation.
Thank you so much. The next question is for both Jason and Susan, and why don't we have Susan go first and then Jason can follow up. And the question is about what obstacles did you overcome to earn the trust and full engagement from your school systems?
Wow, that's a great question. As you can imagine, I don't think we had to overcome anything necessarily, but I think you do when you work with the school system. We're bringing the business community to bear. So from the community standpoint, we wanted to just connect the two better, and perhaps have each side understand how they can and can't work. So there are obviously, as a public school system, there are things that the business community needs to understand on the way that funding rolls, on the way that different aspects of the school system functions. And so just educating both sides, being very careful to bring our superintendent to the table. Karen Clark is the current superintendent, great proponent of this, actually led, as I had mentioned, one of the strategic planning groups, a great background in the educational system here, and deep breadth, a lot of depth and breadth in her understanding of this. So just bringing her to bear, having her speak to the businesses, just really connecting them together, being sure that all of these committees, the strategic leadership group, contained elements of or participants from all of the organizations that were prominent in this area, making sure we didn't step on anyone else's mission, and making sure that we messaged carefully that was not our intent. And if we did, we went to the table with people to figure out how we could function better. But just moving everyone together at the same time. But it's connecting and collaborating and facilitating all those kind of conversations.
I would say from my perspective, we've long had a good relationship with the superintendent and with the school boards. However, what we found that we lacked was guidance counselors, the career counselors, and kind of the next level of administrators within the district, and really pretty disconnected with them. And perhaps they did not see the value that an organization like ours could bring them. And so a couple of things that that we did were visit with them about the needs and the items on their wish list. You know, a lot of counselors and teachers and the like, they have really good innovative ideas for their classrooms, but they can never get the money to implement some of those ideas. And so we actually took some of those ideas and we took them to some of our companies that were squawking the most about labor and offering them an avenue to make a direct financial commitment to a specific project within a school. And we found once we started giving people what was on their wish list, they became much better at responding to phone calls and emails from us.
Great, thank you. The next question is for Lawrence. Lawrence, would you please expand on the concept of outcomes versus outputs?
Sure, absolutely. So outcomes are what you want to ultimately what you want to have happen. Outputs are those. I guess the best way to do it is if I go back to the investor model, or maybe the education model, since we're talking so much about workforce development. When you increase the graduation rate, say by 15%, that's an output. I mean, that's clearly something that's happened. It's an output of what you've been doing. But what does that translate to? What is the outcome of it? You know, sometimes they can get, sometimes like mission and vision get confused with people. Outputs and outcomes do too. The outcomes are what the ultimate goal is, which it's a reflection of the output. So it's great that we're going to have 3,500 new jobs in Gainesville. That's the output. We have 3,500 new jobs. But to be more meaningful, what's the outcome of having those 3,500 jobs? What does it mean to the community? And, you know, in our case, what it means is that, you know, those 3,500 jobs are going to generate $228 million in new investment or new payroll spending. You know, there's new wealth in the region. So you have to take the output and then you have to translate it into the outcome. And once you get to the outcome, then you can have real hard data of what it's going to mean to these investors. And as I said before, investors crave data. They make decisions based on data. And for instance, when we go and ask for money from investors, we like to just keep drilling down, get the right metrics, get the right outcomes over what we're measuring. And then when we go to talk to investors, you know, just yesterday we met with a group of 5, a pretty large company, and asking them for a pretty large ask in the 6-figure range. And, you know, they want to know what's the great plan. Everything looks wonderful, but what does it mean to us? You know, how's it going to help our company? Well, we talk about quality of life. We talk about some of the soft things that it's going to do and how it's going to contribute. But then we get down to, well, it's going to mean, you know, $1.3 million additional available in the community. It's going to mean, you know, more money for car expenditures. It's going to be more money for the banks and deposits and the revenues they earn. So, you know, when you really break it down from the output to the outcome, it resonates and it just brings clarity. And you know, I think it would be a much more difficult ask to go in and just say, hey, here's the things we want to change because we know they need to be changed. It's much more impactful when we say, well, here's what it's going to mean to you, and here's what it's going to mean to our community.
Great. Thank you so much, Lawrence. Next, I have a question for Susan. Susan, are you following the Strive model or Align model, or did you develop your own structure for the compact?
So I'm sorry, ask your question again. I kind of faded out.
Yeah, sure. They're wanting to know if you were following the Strive model or Align model for collective impact, or did you develop your own sort of structure and model for your compact?
Well, I think, like I said, we kind of looked at the Los Angeles compact and we sort of studied, and I think we have our own sort of unique kind of collection of information and data around that. So I would say it's significant to us and specific to us in ways. It was, again, developed with our specific needs in mind and just basically following their lead on output in education.
Thank you so much. And yeah, just for everyone, it was really a good model. It's the LA Compact out of the LA Chamber, and David Rattray leads that effort, and we can connect you with David as well if anyone wants to. The next question is for Lawrence. Lawrence, are there examples of chambers who have successful TRC campaigns and a capital campaign?
You know, that's a great question. I've run into a couple of chambers where we've talked about how do we combine that, how do we make those happen. I don't have a specific example, frankly, but I know it's an issue that's out there and people are trying to wrap around it. I haven't worked with any, and none of the chambers I was with, we didn't do the total resource campaign at the same time. They were separate from what we were doing, so we didn't combine them.
Lauren, this is Jason. Our organization does both the capital campaign and the total resource campaign model. And the first time that we had both of those in the same year, it was pretty challenging for us from a messaging aspect. Well, you're asking me money for this, so then you're asking me for money for that. But our community has adapted to that because we run the TRC campaign every year at the same time, and we run our capital campaign every 5 years. So we'll run into that later this year, and I'm hoping that it goes a little bit smoother than it did in 5 years ago.
Great. The next question is for, I think, anyone, and it's basically more about when you're asking someone for money, what gets the better traction? Is it sort of quick wins like internship programs, or those long range strategies like early education engagement? Which has the better sort of avenue, and how do you combat the ones who don't want to invest in long-term goals?
I'll take the first stab at this. You know, everybody we meet with has their own buttons, and we research everybody we go to meet with. We try to find out as much personally as we can on them. One meeting we went into a few weeks ago, you know, we had kind of an idea of what was of interest to them, and it really happened to center around reading at grade level by, you know, age 3. That was a part of our plan in terms of this new plan of workforce development. It's many of what you heard from Susan and Jason in this new plan. And once they saw that, we knew we were going to focus on that. It resonated with them where we were going and where we were heading. So I think everybody's different. Some people are going to invest in the long run because they're here for the long run. They've got no plans to go anywhere, and they want to see a better community. You know, we've got, in some communities, there are people who are philanthropic in their giving, and, you know, we can ask them for X amount of dollars, and they'll go above and beyond that because they want to see something additional happen. So it's very unique to each investor. It's hard to say that, you know, one's going to invest, you know, long-term, one won't invest long-term. I will say maybe from a general perspective, on the folks that we ask, you know, we target key businesses, not necessarily every business, but the businesses that will benefit the most from the plan that we've laid out. And I'll say a lot of the smaller businesses, let's say 25 employees and below, you know, they're spending 60, 70, 80 hours a week trying to make their widget, bake their bread, whatever it is they do. They don't necessarily know the role of a chamber or an EDO or a plan. And so we've developed some tools we present to them that lays out, you know, kind of where they fit into this whole model and what it's going to mean to them specifically. And for those kind of businesses, they do seem to be more short-term thinkers about, you know, they want to help the community, but, you know, they want to keep their business afloat too. So the return on investment model is really important for them. For the upper tier, let's say the top 30 companies we may go see in a campaign, they can have a mix of issues, but generally the short term is not what's driving them. They want to see a better community. They want to see that pipeline of workers for themselves. They want to make sure the community stays viable so they can attract who they need to attract. So it's a mix. It's too unique to give you a generalization on that. You really have to look at each one you're asking.
Yeah, and I'll jump in too. I agree with what Jason's saying on the customization and individual needs of the companies. That's important. The one twist that we see or saw here in Gainesville, especially as we were developing the Transforming Greater Gainesville schedule, was our business leadership and the leadership of the organization really wanted to see us take a high-level facilitation role in what was undertaken in these 4 strategic lines of business. And so we're a very engaged community. I think that comes with having such large educational institutions here and such depth of education and breadth of this. They really wanted to see us really take a large role in helping to connect and pull all of the various resources that we have together. And so from that perspective, they did want to see us long term. It was like, look, we want you to create that, that long-term talent pipeline, get that K through 12 connected well to what we have with Santa Fe and what we have at the University of Florida, and that's kind of an ongoing, longer-term look. And we knew that there would be, again, metrics on the incremental side. But I agree very much with certain businesses are going to have immediate needs, and they're going to resonate to perhaps the fact that we're doing that, but you can have some individual short-term objectives and goals that could make a huge difference to some of the companies. So what Jason's saying is spot on with, know who you're talking to and customize that based on type of business, size of business, what they're looking at, and just basically the background information that the committee you've comprised to do your outreach and fundraising based on the intel that they have and understand. Be sure you're prepared with all of that before you go in so that you hit on the right buttons for them.
That's perfect. Thank you so much. We are just at time. So with that, I want to thank our panelists one more time. This was a great discussion and really great learnings. For everyone on the line, just a reminder that this webinar was recorded, and we will send a reminder when the recording is up on the ACCE website. We'll let you all know when that's available. In the meantime, I hope everyone has a great day, and please feel free to reach out with any questions you may have. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.